She is the kind of exorcist every Christian exorcist ought to be. On the outside of society as a slave, her name was Isabella Boundfree. By the time she kicked her way into polite, white, Christian feminist society, she was a powerful black woman, preacher dedicated to the cause of exorcising slavery, racism, and sexism from the land. Everywhere she went, she was told that she was an outsider who did not belong. Everywhere she went, she kicked down doors on her way inside, where she was determined she would make herself at home in her own way, not the way others thought was appropriate. And that's why in one of her most famous short sermons in the history of black history, she broke into a meeting of white women in May 1851 in Akron, Ohio, and she exorcised the spirit of American Christian womanhood and opened up the possibility at least that black women, even black slave women, should have all the freedoms and rights that white women were enjoying then and were fighting for in the future. This exorcist on the outside was exorcising a way inside for herself, her sisters, and her people, and that's why she preached. That man over there says women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place, and ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I could have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me, and ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all of them sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Did you hear it? Jesus' name. She used Jesus' name, but in that context, in that time, she was certainly not one of us. But she was spitting out the spirits of slavery and segregation just the same. Ain't she good enough? I imagine that's what the exorcist in Mark's story must have been thinking. Ain't I good enough? Every black person who has lived in this country in either the presence of slavery or its long shadow of racial discrimination has at one point or another understood that cry or some variation of it. We helped build this country. And if the truth be told, without our enslavement, without our blood, without the great sacrifices that our people made in the plantation fields of the American South and the cultured institutions of the American North and on the battlefields that stretched in between, this country would never have become what it became. And yet, even as this country was sapping the very spirit, trying its best to exercise the spirit of freedom and liberty, and the feeling it is to be human and to strive for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the souls of my own great-great-grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins, it depended on their labor for its very national being. It didn't matter that those black slaves called on the same name of Jesus in the same way as their white overseers and political overlords called on it. They were like the exorcist in Mark's story, like that ex-slave who made it her mission to go sojourning through this land in search of truth. They were not one of us. You know, that's what this whole country said in that famous 1857 landmark case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court called Dred Scott. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney argued that the Founding Fathers had never considered blacks as potential members of this political community. As far as he was concerned, the Constitution of the United States precluded their membership as United States citizens. In his opinion, and I'm quoting from him now, the language used in the Declaration of Independence shows that neither the class of black persons who had been imported as slaves nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were acknowledged as part of the people, nor ever intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the sojourner of truth exorcising in rebuttal. Jesus Christ, ain't we Americans? There was a time for exorcists willing to stand up and speak out like Isabella Boundfree. Martin Luther King Jr. was such an exorcist. He knew that there was evil in the land that had to be fought with the same faith power that Jesus used in his time. The words from his letter from a Birmingham jail echo out across the decades. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward political independence, but we still creep at a horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait, but when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen kick, curse, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you have seen the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by including an unconscious bitterness toward white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you are humiliated day in and day out by signs reading white and colored, when your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and your mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. You will also understand why we needed exorcists. You will understand why, reading from that same letter from a Birmingham jail, that King believed that if the church was too squeamish to produce exorcists, God would raise them up elsewhere. He writes, perhaps I have once again begun to be too optimistic. Is organized religion too inextricably bound to the status quo to save our nation and our world? Perhaps I must turn my faith to the inner spiritual church, the church within the church, as the true ecclesia and the hope of the world. But I am thankful to God that some noble souls from the ranks of organized religion have broken loose from the paralyzing chains of conformity and joined us as active partners in the struggle for liberation. They have left their secure congregations and walked the streets of Albany, Georgia with us. They have gone down the highways of the South on the torturous rides for freedom. Yes, they have gone to jail with us. Some of them have been dismissed from their churches, have lost the support of their bishops and their fellow ministers. But they have acted in the faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. Their witness has been the spiritual salt that has preserved the true meaning of the gospel in these troubled times. They have carved a tunnel of hope through that dark mountain of disappointment. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour, but even if church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are at present misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence on the pages of history, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored in this country without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters while suffering gross injustice and shameful humiliation. And yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to thrive and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail.